Hello, welcome back to Reading with Mo, and today we are going to be looking at all the books that I managed to read in the month of June. Overall, I feel like June was just an okay reading month. I have a lot of 3-star books. I actually do have a couple of DNFs to talk to you guys about. So, I mean, it wasn't the worst reading month, but it wasn't the best. I did manage to get to quite a few books, and there's a few books that I started in the month of June I just didn't finish that I'm rolling over into my July TBR. If you want to see what those ones are, then go ahead and check out my TBR video, which is my last one that I've posted here. Firstly, I'll just briefly mention the books that I started and didn't finish, that I don't plan on finishing. These are mostly just books I got from my library, which were kind of like low pressure, whatever. I checked them out, either audiobooks or ebooks, and for whatever reason, just didn't get on with them and decided not to continue. The first one is We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies. This book was on my most anticipated list for I think it was the second quarter of the year. This was by Sarang Yangzam Lama. This book has really good high ratings on Goodreads, so maybe don't take my word for it. I just couldn't really get into it. I was reading the actual physical ebook, so I know it wasn't like just me not gelling with the audiobook narrator, because this one I was reading the ebook for. And I thought I'd be interested in it because it's about a Tibetan family's journey through exile. But a lot of it, I don't know, I just wasn't really getting into it. And I feel like if I was going to read a book on this subject, I'd maybe look for something different. The only other book that I didn't finish and don't plan to is the Memory Librarian and Other Stories of Dirty Computer by Janelle Monáe, Johanka Delgado, and Eve L. Ewing. I was really hopeful about this book. It was from my most anticipated list as well. This one I did get the audiobook for, and I think I listened to like the first 30 minutes or so, and I could just tell like I wasn't really getting into it. I just wasn't really interested in the story, so I decided to not push myself through. I feel like I could have, with both of these books, I feel like I could have pushed my way through and maybe ended up giving them a 3-star, but I just didn't want to be reading anything I wasn't really loving, just because I had at that point in the month already read so many books that were 3-star reads that I thought were just okay. I just wanted something a little bit more. So let's go ahead and get to the books that I actually did finish for the month of June. Let's start off on a high note. So the one 5-star book I gave last month was to 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. Now, this was very unexpected for me. I wasn't even planning honestly on reading this book. I just needed an audiobook for my library because I had gotten through the ones I already had checked out. So this one was immediately available for checkout. It was on the shelf that I was working on for the month, and I decided to give it a try and see. I have not read hardly any books on Greek and Roman mythology and history, so it's a subject that's very unfamiliar to me. I thought I was a little bit more knowledgeable about it, but going into this book made me realize I really know nothing about the topics, which was very refreshing. So it was cool to read something that I hadn't really been exposed to as much before, and now after finishing this book and enjoying it so much, I definitely want to read more books on the subject. I have another book by this author, I believe it's called Pandora's Jar, on my shelves that I will definitely be prioritizing soon. So with this book, we are following all of the different women who were involved in the war between the Greeks and the Trojans. This is an all-female perspective, and there are a lot of perspectives. Some we only get for one chapter, some we will return to a few times throughout the novel. I just really enjoyed it, and it almost read like an interconnected series of short stories. So yeah, I just really love the writing on this, and it's not very often that I give an audiobook 5 stars, but this one really drew me in from the start, and I actually felt myself really looking forward to getting back into this book whenever I had to set it down. So that's also a very good sign that I am really enjoying a book when I'm thinking about it, even when I'm not reading it. Yeah, all in all, this book just left me with the feeling that I really want to brush up on my Greek and Roman history, mythology, and all that stuff surrounding it, because I just find it so fascinating. And I'm really glad that I happened to pick this book up last month, because like I said, this is the only 5-star read. Everything else that I finished I think was like 3 stars, which is good, but it's just not. 3 stars are good books. I don't regret reading them, but I just don't feel like they're going to be memorable, and they're not really books that I plan on keeping on my shelves, because I'm most likely never going to reach for it to reread that book. So I have 4 other books I wanted to share with you guys that are all physical books that I finished last month. So the first one was a book that was kindly sent to me from Book of the Month, and it was also on, I think it was on my anticipated books for like the earlier part of the year. I can't remember for sure now, and that is Take My Hand by Dolan Perkins Valdez. I really enjoyed this book. I actually ended up listening to it on audiobook. This book actually gave 4 stars. I did enjoy this for an audiobook. So we're following the story of Sybil Townsend, I believe her name was. Yes, and this takes place in Montgomery, Alabama in 1973. She is just out of nursing school and she really wants to help make a difference for her community. So she ends up getting hired on at this family planning what's it called, like a clinic. Her very first week she ends up taking on this case with these 2 sisters. One's 11 and one's like 13 or so. Yeah, 11 and 13. They're poor and they're basically just living in this 1-room cabin with their dad and their grandma, which is just like not even barely livable. I don't really want to go too more into that because I know that the synopsis doesn't say anything really more about that, but the things that happen afterwards just get crazy, and the fact that it's based off of actual historical events and things that were happening at this time medically to people in this demographic, it's just crazy. And I really appreciate the book for bringing this to my attention because it's not something that I have really been heard of too much or been exposed to before, and there are definitely parts of this book where you will be very upset, very angry with how the system is treating these children and other people like them. It was definitely there were definitely some hard-hitting parts in this book. Besides A Thousand Ships, this book, Take My Hand, is probably the second book that I enjoyed the most that I read last month. Well, enjoyed, even though it was definitely, like I said, a very hard-hitting book to read and listen to. Next, we have a book that is, I don't know if you would say it's like a classic, but maybe like a modern classic because it was published in 1975, and that is Corregidora by Gail Jones. I absolutely love the cover on this book, but this was one of the books I was talking about that ended up getting a 3 stars from me, rating from me. I thought it was okay. This book is so short. It's less than 200 pages, so I figured this was going to be a really easy, quick read. It's something that's sitting on my shelves way too long, and this book took so long for me to read, like hours and hours. I don't know why. It's just maybe just the writing style or what. I don't know, just something about the writing just didn't really click with me. I did feel like the story was very interesting for sure. I think I went into higher expectations because it's blurbed by Toni Morrison, and her little quote on the cover says, "No novel about any Black woman could ever be the same after this." So I really expected to be blown away by this novel, and just unfortunately I wasn't. Not to say it was a bad novel, it's just, I don't know, I just never really felt fully invested in the characters. Like, definitely there are some sad and devastating things that our main character is going through. So basically we're following Ursa. She is a blues singer. At the beginning of the novel, she goes through this very traumatic experience with her and her then husband, and we follow where everything that leads. Some parts I just feel like maybe if I were to read some more like other literature analysis of this book, I would get it more, but I don't know, I just overall felt a little bit underwhelmed by this book, but I am glad that I still read it and gave it 3 stars. Next, we have a book that was sent to me, and I'm so glad I finally got to it. I feel so bad it took me so long to get to it, and that is Starlight, a collection of short stories by Hannah Lee Kidder, who is also a booktuber here on YouTube, and she had sent me her short story collection. I end up giving this 3 stars, which is pretty average for my short story reading experiences in general, just because, you know, there's going to always be some that you're into and some that you're not. This collection actually has some very short stories, like some that are only like 1 or 2 pages, so those were a little bit harder for me to get into just because I'm not someone who even reads like poetry or anything, so like short form writing is just usually not something I'm really into. But there are some short stories that are a bit longer that are throughout the book, and the book is very short itself. It's only about 100 pages, but I really did enjoy the ones that were longer and gave you a little bit more plot and time with the characters. I really enjoyed those ones, so that's why I'm going with my middle rating of 3. The stories themselves are definitely more on the darker side of themes, and I feel like the genre is kind of supposed to be more on the like horror fantasy side, so if that sounds like something you're interested in, then maybe check this out. Yeah, I would definitely be interested in more by Hannah if she ever does come out with like a full-length novel or something like that. And the last physical book that I have to show you guys is Melmoth by Sarah Perry. I actually also listened to this one on audiobook, and I gave this one actually 2 stars. I had high hopes for this novel. I feel like I was really into it for the first part, but then it kind of lost me a little bit. I'm not sure, just something, I don't know, somewhere plot-wise, writing-wise, I just found myself not really caring, and then when I get to that point I stop paying full attention to the audiobook. So I probably should have just DNF'd this, but I had gotten to a point where I just wanted to know what the ending was and where this was going, but I didn't necessarily find it the most enjoyable read, which is sad because I do have another book on my shelves by this author called The Essex Serpent, which I will be getting to because I want to know if it's just this book that I didn't get on with or her writing in general. But yeah, because I only gave this one 2 stars, the other one's not really high priority. I will get to it eventually though. This book kind of revolves around this legend called Melmoth the Witness, and we're following our main character Helen. She's very isolated from society, but she does have a few friends. She works as a translator and she lives with this older woman who's her roommate. And one of her friends, who I believe also works either in like translating or with literature or whatever, he becomes obsessed with this fairy tale, and he believes that, well, I don't even want to give away too much of what's happening in this book because honestly I don't want to say it wrong either, because it's been a minute since I finished this, so it's kind of jumbled in my head exactly what happens. But I just remember there's a lot of different settings in this book. We do a lot of different time jumps and things, which in theory should have made it more interesting, but I don't know, I just felt it kind of it just was a miss for me, unfortunately. So I don't know any other way to put it, but if you guys have read this book and enjoyed it, let me know, because I am interested in hearing the perspective of someone who was really into this book. And the last 4 books I want to share with you guys are books I do not own physical copies of. I checked these out from my library. So the first one was an audiobook, and it was called In the Face of the Sun by Denny S. Bryce. This was a book from one of my most anticipated videos. And in this book, we are kind of going on this road trip. So in the beginning, we're following this woman, and she is trying to get away from her husband. And we don't really know too much what's going on with that, but it's slowly revealed throughout the novel. She ends up going on this road trip with her aunt and her aunt's friend, and along the way we're learning a lot about their family past, because they have not had a relationship, because the aunt has been estranged from their family. I think pretty much our main character, whose name was her name was Frankie, and so yeah, Frankie really hasn't known too much about her aunt or her past or why she has been estranged from the family. And the novel goes back and forth between the perspective of what's the modern day, the road trip with Frankie, to Daisy, who is her aunt, back in the day when she used to work in, I believe it was in the 20s in Los Angeles, at this like super elite African-American hotel. And she was working at the time there as a journalist, on the side, or trying to be a journalist as she was working in the hotel. All in all, I gave this book 3 stars. That was good, but not super memorable. Something I'm probably not going to remember too much in a few years, or even by the end of this year, to be honest. But I did enjoy my time reading it, and it was entertaining as an audiobook to listen to. And we have A Woman of Endurance by Dalma Llanos Figueroa. I gave this book 4 stars. I checked this one out as an ebook from my library, and in this one, I remember really enjoying like the writing and how the story was told. It actually takes place at a Puerto Rican plantation society. Our main character, her name's Pola, and we do get some flashbacks of her when she's being taken from her native country and transported to this plantation. At the very beginning, we're seeing her going through her attempt to escape from the abusive plantation that she's on, and then her journey as she comes to this new plantation, having to work there. This book is definitely a lot about the violence and her having to deal with what she has gone through in the past. She's had a lot of very, very traumatic experiences in her life, and now her having to try to trust other people and open up to others and not be isolated among the people that she's with is very hard for her. She struggles with that. I really enjoyed that this novel does have some like not like kind of like uplifting, heartwarming moments. Like it's not all just like very depressing, even though it's easy to go that way when you're handling such a heavy subject matter, to still be able to make it a story about hope and survival. Our main character, she has to deal with so much grief throughout her life that no one would blame her for wanting to give up on her life, but still being able to find a life for herself despite her horrific past and all the things that she's gone through and is currently going through in this book is just definitely very inspiring to see. Oh, and I forgot to mention one other book I actually didn't finish that I started last month and I don't plan to continue with, and that one was The Colony by Audrey McGee. I barely got into this book. I can't even really tell you too much about what it was about. Like I said, I barely got into this one, and I think it was just me not gelling with the author's writing and storytelling, just to be honest. And it was told in a very lyrical, poetic way, the story, but I could just tell that it wasn't something that I was loving, so I didn't want to push through that. And back to the last book that I ended up finishing last month, and that was a nonfiction book. This one was called The Devil's Half Acre, The Untold Story of How One Woman Liberated the South's Most Notorious Slave Jail by Kristen Green. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I listened to it on audiobook. I feel like for me, the reason why I didn't give it a higher star rating was because I felt like a lot of this story is speculation, which isn't the author's fault. The author has very much, you could tell, has really researched this book well, but it's just there's not very much information available to us about this history, specifically of the Devil's Half Acre. It was transformed into one of the nation's first HBCUs. We are following the story of Mary Lumpkin, and there's just not really a lot of stuff about her. So a lot of the times the author says maybe she thought this, maybe she did this, maybe that. And so a lot of it is just a lot is speculation. I mean, it's speculation made by a lot of research and stuff, but at the end of the day, like, it's not necessarily factual, but there are a lot of stuff that is very historically accurate. You can tell that she does a lot of research on this time period and a lot of different offshooting things that are related to the history of this jail, like the history of the slave trade and all sorts of history around this subject. As far as if you're going into this book, I would just say don't go into it necessarily as it being focused on Mary herself. It's kind of bigger than that, encompasses a lot more than that. So while I feel like this was definitely a well-researched book, I just, maybe also it's because I listened to it on audiobook too, could be, but I just felt like my mind was drifting a lot and the writing didn't necessarily hold my attention like I was hoping that it would. But if this is a subject that you want to learn more about, I would definitely recommend it in that case. I also read I believe it was like just a historical fiction novel based off, where the main character was loosely based off of Mary Lumpkin. That was what is that book called? The Yellow Wife by Sadiqa Johnson. I had read that last year and I really enjoyed it, and her character is loosely based off of Mary Lumpkin, who's an actual historical figure. And so I would definitely check that out if you are wanting to read about Mary Lumpkin in more of a like historical fiction setting. So those are all the books that I wanted to talk about with you guys today that I read in the month of June. Altogether, not a bad reading month. It could have been better, it could have been worse. But I think that I am glad just with what I was able to get to for last month. So let me know what you guys read last month, if you have any hits or misses you want to share with me. And I think that's it for today. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!